Let's talk about this ban on Maccabi Tel Aviv supporters. And I think other podcasts will debate the politics of it. I'm just intrigued by the footballing and administrative mechanics of it. And I'll just tell you straight off the bat, Charlie, my thoughts on him. And clearly, there is a political dimension to this game, which it would be foolish to ignore. But I'm speaking to you from Birmingham, the city from which Maccabi Tel Aviv supporters have been banned. And I know that in the past, West Midlands police have policed many high profile football fixtures. Aston Villa against Birmingham City, West Bromwich Albion against Wolverhampton Wanderers in the FA Cup last year. The game between the Baggies and the Wolves, you may remember, was held up for several minutes because of crowd disorder. These are not unusual. On the day in which we're recording this, Manchester United and Liverpool are playing, again, a very high profile fixture. Now, for domestic matches where there is perceived to be a likelihood of disorder, the police organise what are known as bubble matches. They're less popular now than they were, but I think they still might pertain. For example, in the South Wales derby, if Swansea play Cardiff, and the idea of a bubble match, as I'm sure you'll know, Charlie, is that you are only allowed to access the ground via a designated coach. You don't get your match ticket until you are on your coach. So you're bussed in and out of the ground. And then after the game, the area is cleared and you are then taken back to a destination well away from the ground. And bearing in mind that most of the Maccabi Tel Aviv supporters will be flying in from Israel, I don't understand how it's come to this point. Why couldn't the Maccabi Tel Aviv trip just be organised as a bubble match with police keeping any protesters who are protesting about nothing to do with the football just kept at some kind of exclusion zone well away from the stadium?
Well, it's much more complex than that. So, first of all, let's look at the process, right? So, there's something called the SGSA, the Sports Ground Safety Authority. It is an arm's length body, a quango of the kind that right wing parties regularly pledge to abolish. It's been in place for quite a while, following various acts of parliament passed normally after some ghastly stadium disaster. I think there was one in 75, there was another act in 1989, there was another one in 2011. And the effect of all of these acts was to tighten up what could and couldn't happen inside a football stadium, which obviously has, generally speaking, changed things for the better compared to our youth, as much as we can look back at it through some sepia-tinted glasses. In reality, one wouldn't want to revisit those days. So the SGSA publishes something called the Green Guide. The Green Guide is a book which is the guide for how to make your sports stadium, your football stadium in this case, and the surrounding environment safe, right? So that's where all the regulations are housed, is in the Green Guide. The policing of, so I use that word policing in a sort of ambiguous way, the policing of the Green Guide, the implementation of the Green Guide is undertaken on a club by club, city by city group called the Safety Advisory Group. And on the Safety Advisory Group will sit various different local worthies. There will be a representative or one or more representatives from the local police force. There'll be a representative from the local authority. There will be a representative from the local fire service. There'll be a representative from the club in question, the local club in question. And from time to time, an SGSA person will be there as well, but not necessarily so. And the purpose of the SAG, the SAG, is to weigh up on a week to week, month to month basis whether there is anything going on which might somehow cause a problem, cause the Green Guide to be in some way in peril, in whatever it might be, or any other kind of local disturbance. The representative of the club will normally be the club's security guy, the safety guy, right? The head of safety or whatever differing titles, but normally called the head of safety, right? So the person who basically is there in the control room on match day, trying to make sure alongside the police that the whole thing is done correctly. And if you think about the head of safety is in charge of the stewards, and the police guy there is in charge of the police, and they work together hand in glove, etc. So these SAGs are of varying types. Some are more what I would call balanced, and we generally speaking will take the view, let's get this on, but let's see what we can do. And that was definitely the case when we were at Oxford. We had a good relationship with the Thames Valley Police, and even in an occasion as dangerous as the A420 Derby, Oxford and Swindon, which has horrific roots back in the Civil War and always ends up in mass rioting. Basically, it's one of the last fixtures where there's sort of mass rioting, proper, hundreds of them charging each other outside the stadiums and all this stuff, up and down the hedgerows, etc. And they would, generally speaking, be very pragmatic about it. That was not really my experience when it came to the Met. The SAG at Charlton would generally much more on the side of extreme caution, despite the fact that there were no crowd disturbances at Charlton whatsoever. Charlton's one of the safest clubs that you'll ever see, but nonetheless, if you don't have a strong safety officer, if you don't have somebody who's willing to go and fight the club's corner with the local police, you can end up being on the receiving end of a lot of judgments that aren't necessarily going to be pragmatic, or certainly not in the fans' favour. So this is the forum in which all of these things get discussed, right? And effectively, what will happen in the run-up to a match like this is that the SAG will meet and people will pool their concerns. I'm worried about this, or what happens if this happens, or what happens if that happens? And it normally relates to two things, which you've just referred to. What happens inside the stadium, and what happens in terms of egress or ingress to and from the stadium, right? These are the traditional issues to do with football matches. In this case, I'd love to see the minutes of the meeting, because I don't think that there's actually really anyone suggesting that there would be any significant problems inside the stadium, right? I don't think anyone is suggesting that Villa fans are going to go and riot against Maccabi Tel Aviv fans, or vice versa, right? Or particularly even in their way in and out of the stadium. What this relates to is a match that took place last season between Maccabi Tel Aviv and Ajax Amsterdam, right? When actually there was no issue inside the Johan Cruyff Arena, and there was no issue coming in and out of the Johan Cruyff Arena. The issues were having a large number of Maccabi Tel Aviv fans in the city centre before and after the game, and the opportunity that gave to local groups, perhaps opposed to Israeli policy in some way, shape, or form, and indeed to Tel Aviv fans themselves, who, also didn't cover themselves in glory. There was some chanting from the Tel Aviv fans, which is available online, which would not pass muster, I think, in terms of polite society and their views on what was then the ongoing war in Gaza, in the Gaza Strip. So this is a situation, I suspect, when the local police have said, we don't want to have thousands of Maccabi Tel Aviv fans wandering around Birmingham city centre, given what happened last year in Amsterdam. So therefore, if they're actually not allowed to attend the match live, that makes it much less likely that they're going to turn up, obviously. And therefore, we might avoid this whole thing happening. So it seems to me like the police and the local authority maybe have gone into that SAG wanting there to be a ban on away fans. And Villa, rather than fighting for, no, this is a football match, we have no problems inside the stadium. There is not going to be a problem inside the stadium. You guys must police your streets. That's what you need as a football club to do. You need to fight your corner and say, you're not going to do this to us. This is not going to be on us. We're not going to be the club that ends up banning Jewish fans. That's not what we want. And then, if need be, you have to make it public. You have to make a statement to the media saying, we disagree with what the police are saying about X, Y, and Z. What seems to have happened here is a bit of sort of stitch up, because if you read some of the detailed reporting, Villa were already telling their stewards that some time before this announcement was made, that it wouldn't be such a big problem if some of them didn't turn up that day. Now, that suggests to me that they're looking to de-steward the situation, which you can do when there are no away fans, right? So it suggests to me the club knew well in advance of this becoming public, that, or if not well in advance, then in advance of this becoming public, that this decision was going to be made, and that it was a decision which they were not minded to fight on. Obviously, there would not be a large financial element to this because you're probably talking about 1,500 people paying 30 or 40 quid each or whatever it might be. So it's not a large financial matter. But I do think that football clubs have to fight their corner on SAGs. It's really, really important. It's so easy just to go, oh, well, somebody doesn't want it to happen. So, let's just not let it happen. And then a precedent is set. And then the next time it happens, they say, well, last time you didn't have a problem with it. And of course, there's no counterfactual because if you ban the away fans and then there's no trouble, the police say, well, look, there you are. If you ban away fans, then there's no trouble. Ipso facto, we should ban away fans more often.
Indeed, and this is what takes us back to the 1980s, and this is why
Indeed.
I think for me as a football fan, over and above any broader political concern, I'm troubled by this. And just to back up what you've said, Villa's statement says West Midlands Police have advised the Safety Advisory Group that they have public safety concerns outside the Stadium Bowl and on the ability to deal with any potential protests on the night. Now, listen, given the horrendous stabbings at a synagogue in Manchester recently, I don't want to underplay the threat that there might be to broader community relations. I think it would be foolish to ignore that in this specific context. At the same time, if you have the bubble match philosophy to this, and as I say, it's particularly easy, it seems to me, to do this for Maccabi Tel Aviv supporters, because you could say, well, you're only going to get to the stadium if you're at a coach park in Birmingham Airport, and you'll be there 4 hours before the game. You'll be bussed in. Only at that point will you receive your ticket. You will then be held in the stadium after the game for as long as is necessary, and then you will be bussed back to the airport. That's the deal. And you might limit that to maybe 200 Maccabi Tel Aviv supporters. As a point of principle, you then say supporters are allowed, and we, the police, are not going to stop away fans from visiting. But you also then manage the public order issue around it as far as the stadium is concerned. Beyond that, well, you're dealing with a broad public safety issue or a public order issue, which I don't know. Is it fair to blame Maccabi Tel Aviv supporters or Aston Villa supporters for that?
Well, certainly not fair to blame Aston Villa supporters who seem to be entirely blameless in this, absolutely nothing whatsoever. But Maccabi Tel Aviv supporters, I suppose you could say that given some of the scenes, in Amsterdam last year, were they provoked? Possibly. Were they the ones doing the provoking? Possibly. Don't know. Don't really want to get into it. But some of the scenes in Amsterdam last year were not great. But that's why we have the police.
Yes.
The police are meant to be able to maintain public order whilst the majority of people go about their normal business. So it'd be equivalent to saying, well, we're going to ban the Notting Hill Carnival because there are some bad actors at the Notting Hill Carnival, therefore spoiling the fun for hundreds of thousands of other people who are there simply to have a good time. Now, if you think about this situation, what's happening is that 95% of the Maccabi Tel Aviv supporters who are simply wanting to follow their club away from home at one of the great historic stadiums of European football are being prevented from doing so because our police force says, well, we can't really police the streets of Birmingham. We can't really keep them safe. We don't really know what's going to go on. Well, we're not up to it, really. And I think that's a bad look.
Yeah, and picking up on the point about the Maccabi supporters, I mean, clearly amongst their number are people who are willing to say some pretty vile things that, in my opinion, would breach hate crime laws in this country. And should they say or do anything that would breach a hate crime law in this country, they should be arrested and punished in accordance with the law. But I hold it as a fundamental principle, and I suspect you and I might agree on this, Charlie, that you cannot or should not collectively punish individuals for the behavior of other members of their group. And as I say that, I'm conscious that there will be people who will be drawing parallels with what is regarded as a genocide in Gaza and so on. And as I say, this is not the place for a political discussion of that kind. And if there is a bigger discussion to be had about whether Israeli teams, in light of what's happened in Gaza, should be playing in European competitions, I think there is a discussion there to be had. But that's not this discussion because Israeli teams have not been banned from European competition. So it's almost as though unilaterally West Midlands Police are making that decision for UEFA.
Yes. What's been your experience of West Midlands Police in your decades of being involved in football or in the area?
Historically, they were one of the worst forces in the country in terms of dealing with football supporters. But bear in mind, I'm an old man, Charlie, and this goes back into the 80s and the 90s, and they were a force who were notorious for not discriminating between good and bad supporters. But as the temperature, thankfully, has improved in stadiums, I suspect that, like most forces now, I'm generally unaware of them except when I need them. And I've got no general issue with West Midlands Police, either inside or outside of stadiums. I think they do. I think we have to acknowledge a difficult job. And in my experience at matches in the West Midlands, people may tell me there are exceptions to this, but in my experience, they do it pretty well. And they have got experience as well. It should be said, Charlie, that from West Midlands Police's point of view, they had the trip of Legia Warsaw fans to Villa Park. Now, this is a different issue, I suppose. This was in November 2023, but Legia fans who were in Birmingham for the game at Villa were actually denied entry to the stadium because of the misbehaviour of their fans, and they were subsequently banned from 5 European away games because of their behaviour. And I should say, beyond the West Midlands, there are precedents for banning away supporters. I think Eintracht Frankfurt supporters have been banned from Naples from a Champions League game. But as I say, I mean, the hard thing here is that this is not really about the behaviour of the Maccabi supporters, even though amongst their number may well be some pretty vile people.
Yes, this is about the anticipated behaviour of local elements in Birmingham. That's what
And
this is
and
chief.
possibly from further abroad, further and from outside the city as well,
Yeah,
perhaps.
possibly so.
Mm.
So yeah, look, I think you and I agree, right? In summary, um, there were ways to ensure that the principle of allowing away supporters to attend was maintained, even while being cautious about general public order. There were ways to do it. There were thoughtful ways to do it, and those don't seem to have been explored. Instead of which, it seems to reach for the ripcord and just say, look, let's just not do it. Let's just try and ban everybody. And that's just, yeah, for me, that's a terrible precedent to set, particularly when it doesn't relate to anything involving stadium violence. Right. I mean, that is a very, very strange precedent to set, and goodness knows where that takes us going forward.